So, what I'm talking about today is how our values are actually experienced or felt with a neurotypical brain, with a not neurotypical brain, whatever that means. I'm still in the muddly middle of how this stuff is all coming together in terms of coaching. So, my big question here is, what do you coach to change? And what do you coach to accept and embrace and stop feeling shame about? Stop feeling shame about all of it, obviously. But what do you really focus on as something that you can now recognize is just going on? It's wired in. You have the chemistry that's making A, B, C, or D difficult. Do you want to change it? And I really feel like the language around ADHD is so far and wide. It's so often spoken about as a dysregulation, as a dysfunction, all these words that are really negative. And I do think it's going to phase out, and people are going to increasingly realize that it's just a different way that the brain is wired. And one of the ways that I think is most important to think about that is in our values. So, as a coach who may or may not, probably very often is going to be working with people who have these different ways of thinking, hence why the world as it is has been harder to navigate for those people than for some of the neurotypical people. Our values really point to why that may be. So, all of us grow up in a culture. We cannot be untouched by our culture, by our society, by our family, by our gender, by all of the things that influence our experience. And every one of those things affects our values, what we actually think is important. So, I just want to begin by defining values because I think it's a very ambiguous word. And what I mean by values is those things that we find most compelling to live for. So these are the things that make us feel alive. These are the things that give meaning to our lives. They're the things that are most important to us. So values are deeply unconscious, usually. So we sometimes know our values. I might know that I value dancing and I value my children's lives, and there's some really obvious ones out there, but it's really about the driver of what will you do in your hierarchy of values. So very often it is true that your value of, say, kindness is top. It's one of your top values. You really do live a life that demonstrates that you value kindness above all else. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a situation in which you will abandon kindness because one of your other values is being compromised in a way where you no longer can put your focus on the kindness value. There's something more important, say survival, right? So it is more important to me to survive, live, my children, my family, a stranger on the street, really, if their life was in danger and I had to compromise kindness in order to save that person's life or to keep them from harm, then I would, right? But only a certain degree of harm. I would let them maybe, I don't know, walk around with their shoe untied and or let them have something on their face that I decide that I'm going to live my value of kindness above whatever I perceive as something else. There's a certain amount that I might allow, but then there's a threshold that I'm going to hit, and I'm going to abandon my value of kindness because there's a value that's more important. It's very I'm not even going to explain it more than that. It's very comprehensive. Values are those things that are most important to you. And our values very often drive our lives in ways that we don't understand. So I would say that probably most of the time when people have really difficult circumstances that they're trying to overcome or conflicts in their lives, there's going to be an element of their values being misaligned. So we have three things to give, and three only. We have time, we have money, we have energy. Those are the three ways that we can demonstrate what we value. So if you ask yourself the question, where do I spend my time? Where do I spend my money? And where do I spend my energy? Then you're going to get a picture, maybe if you're a very aligned person, of what you actually value. There are these people in the world who actually, if you shook their life, you did like an audit on their life, their time, money, and energy would actually show you what they most value. And then there's a whole bunch of other people, way more people, who say that they value supporting their communities, giving back, making an impact, I don't know, caring for the environment, all that kind of stuff. But if you actually did a little audit on their life in the last week or month of their life, you would see that they give very little money, very little time, very little energy to those particular things. And where they're actually putting their money, time, and energy is into something that either they don't know that they value, or perhaps it's something that they feel like they should value, or it could be things that other people value and therefore they adapt or adopt. And so those people very often sometimes don't understand why they're not feeling satisfied, why they're not feeling fulfilled. And the reason is because they're living out of alignment with their actual values. And so a lot of the work that we do as coaches is really fundamentally trying to answer the question of what do you really truly value, and why are you living a life that doesn't allow you to experience that? So when it comes to ADHD and neurodiversity and neurotypical ways of thinking, our values show up so often in what makes us feel alive. So if I'm working with a client and I'm trying to get a sense of what they do truly value, the question that's going to most effectively get me to the center of what do you value, is to ask the question, what makes you feel the most alive? So I would ask you guys right now to just pause for a moment and ask that question in the last week. Maybe you have to go 2 weeks or more. Just think of something right now that actually made you feel when you were doing it totally alive. And I'm not even necessarily saying good or bad. Sometimes it could be that we feel totally alive when we're in the middle of problem solving, and you wouldn't necessarily describe it as a really positive experience, but it's aliveness, it's intensity, it's vibrancy in your system. It's like you know that you're using yourself in a way where you're engaging so much of yourself toward this problem or toward this experience or activity. And if you think about something that you've done recently, ask yourself the question, what was happening that I actually so valued? So if it was, say, something like that, like solving a problem, maybe you had a friend who was in trouble and you had to come and sit with her for a couple of hours and figure out how she was going to dump this boyfriend. And even though it was like a tough conversation, it just like your blood was running and you were feeling really alive, and it just left you energized in a way where you felt really good about how you had spent your time, how those particular couple hours of your life felt meaningful. And of course, the value isn't going to be like helping my friends break up with their boyfriends. Maybe it's a specialty of mine. But it may indicate to you, it would more likely indicate to you that, is it because you were able to help your friend out of a problem? Is it that you just really value helping people sort out problems? Is it just problem solving? Some people just really have a high value of problem solving, and they don't usually get to experience that. We don't talk about that a lot in society as being like a unique, specific value. But I would argue that is a really big value for some people. And they don't really care whose problem it is. These are the people that will listen to anybody's problems. These people that often get reputations of being gossips, which is such a mean way to think about somebody. But the truth is, it makes them feel alive when they hear that the neighbor did this and then got mad and whatever happened. And we can all look at it righteously and judge it as being like gossipy and shitty and petty and whatever. But I would say that very often this is probably somebody who actually values the experience of emotions, problem solving. There could be a whole bunch of stuff embedded in there, and it may be misdirected, right? It may be that what you would want to do with this person is say, hey, man, you seem to really come alive when we're talking about neighborhood gossip. And I think a great coach, if you happen to pause time and step in and be a coach to that person, may be like, what are you doing with your life right now? If you're a banker, or if you're somebody who doesn't have any of this in your work or in your maybe you want to shift and see if you can't pivot so that you're actually doing something in life that allows you to experience more of this. Because the question I would ask you next would be that thing that you thought of. Try and get the value out of it. So try and shake it down. I'll actually stop talking here for a moment and think about what is the actual value part that made you come alive. And if you can get your finger on a tangible value, now ask yourself, how often in your life do you give yourself the opportunity to have that experience, to actually engage with and experience that particular value? And that question for most people, sadly, is pretty rare. Usually people find that they don't often have a lot of the thing that they most value, except for the person who does walk around the neighborhood. They're probably happier than anybody else. The one that walks around the neighborhood and does all the gossip and all that kind of stuff and engages with it all the time. But those people who really do actually feed their values tend to be the people who are really alive. I look at my teenagers right now that have nothing but time on their hands, right? They've got all this just time as teenagers. And it's so neat to watch them fill it with their own values. And I have a son who just will not stop playing guitar. He's attached at the hip, and that's all he wants to do. And I have my daughter who is just blossoming in that time of life. She's 12, and she is just opening into social engagement and connection and having best friends and having secrets and having different types of relationships and realizing that friendships each have a different quality to them. Some of her friends are like sports friends that she does this with, and some of them are like little confidants, and some of them are, and she's enraptured by it. She's so engaged in it. And it would be very easy to generalize it and say this is all just I don't know what it, but I think that there's something really beautiful about what it is that she values. She's probably going to be somebody who spends her life really learning a lot and getting a lot of joy and pleasure out of connection, out of relationships. When you think about the values that bring you to life, if you could do this exercise on the regular, I would say as a practice, if it's one of those things that you could ask yourself the question, what did I do today that made me feel most alive? Forget about good or bad, positive or negative. Just what did I do today that made me feel most alive? And if you kept a journal of that just beside your bed for any amount of time, the insight that it's going to give you in terms of your own values and what you want to pursue is going to be gold. It's going to be something that I promise you will allow you to just reflect on the choices that you're making and start moving toward those values in a way that could truly be life-changing for you. Okay, let me get to the bulk of this, and then I'm going to walk through another little exercise at the end. But in terms of ADHD, this is what I'm discovering. So the thing about ADHD brains and values is that neurotypical brains, one of the things that they do very well is hold abstract values in their head for years without feeling them. Okay, so neurotypical people can say something like, I value financial security, and work toward that for a decade without needing immediate reinforcement. So their nervous system is actually wired to tolerate delay. This is one of the big, giant differences between ADHD and neurotypical, is that the wiring for the delay is usually one of the places where the ADHD wired folk don't have it as much. So the ADHD brain works differently in that our values are not intellectual commitments. Very rarely is an ADHD brain going to have an intellectual commitment, because ADHD is one of the sort of definitions of it, distinctions of it, is that you're so alive in your nervous system all the time. All the time. You're just alive inside your nervous system all the time. It's why moods and emotions so often dictate all of our decisions and our choices. Is because while we can be very intellectual, we can live in our heads in terms of thinking about our choices, and our experience is still inside our nervous system. And so you either feel your value or you don't feel your value. And when you don't feel the value, it's very hard to value it. So when I say that someone with ADHD has a value, what I mean by that is that it has to feel present. In order for it to be a really lived value for someone with an ADHD brain, is that it must feel present to them and activate them in the moment, which is where it's slightly different. Not slightly, quite a bit different from a neurotypical brain. So these connections of what makes you feel most alive for a neurotypical person, if anyone's been listening to this and doing this right now who has a neurotypical brain, you may not have the same intensity of experience in terms of aliveness as those of us with the ADHD brains have. So just notice your experience and what it was like when I use the words, what makes you feel most alive. For a lot of people, it'll be connection. A lot of people with ADHD and without are going to value connection. But the difference is that somebody with ADHD is going to have a much closer, more present experience of connection than somebody who is more neurotypical, who may be able to value connection on a linear scale a little better. So those of us with ADHD may have a little more difficulty parenting because we're not really parenting to the trajectory of the child over time. We're parenting to the child right now, here in this moment, more so than a neurotypical parent. So it's tough. I will tell you from my personal experience, it is so tough for me to hand out something to my kids that I know I'm a very smart person. I am a coach. I'm really aware of the fact that there is a trajectory here that I should be protecting and nurturing for my children to do better in the future and what I do now. But when it's contradictory to what the present experience is, it's so hard for me. And I talk to people who are more typical, and it's not as though they're absent of feeling that. Nobody likes disappointing their kids, right? Nobody likes letting their kids down if their heart is set on something or whatever it is. There's no parent that enjoys that. However, there are a lot of parents who have an easier time with it than I do. There's a lot of parents who it's so clear to them that the right thing to do is to set their kid on this direction. And yes, that means they're going to sacrifice this or give up that or have them disappointed. But they're so clear on it that they can just do it. Whereas I literally can't, because my nervous system lays me out. It just lays me out. It makes me feel like I'm going to be sick doing that kind of stuff. So I have to find other ways to do it. Obviously, I don't let my kids just be feral. I do make decisions for them that are good for their future, but I don't really discipline my children. So I'll let you know how that works out. So far, it's not so bad. And there's Paul. Yeah. Yeah, so in terms of values, that sort of connection. So someone with an ADHD will drop nearly anything. They'll be like super spontaneous. These are the people that have no problem dropping anything when somebody they care about, because it lights them up in real time. And I have a list at the end that I will go through that tend to be common values for people with ADHD. You can guess things like novelty, autonomy, those sorts of things. Usually a value actually needs to feel like they're solving something new, like creating something, making their own choices in the moment. So values that don't align with those things are hard for them to value. So something like financial stability is just, even though we know it in our brains, that is a very smart value to have. I don't know if there's enough NLP out there where you could actually have that be a felt experience value. Okay. The next thing I will say before I move on, the coaching here is really important. This is one of those things we teach in NLP all the time: get people to respond from their gut, from their intuition, from their gut. Try and avoid the thinky response. And this is one place where it's really important. I would say for both neurotypical and neurodivergent people, but even more, make sure that they're not thinking what their values should be, and really use the language. If you know you're working with somebody with ADHD, what activates you, what makes you feel alive, as opposed to what's important to you. What do you think is the most important, most meaningful things? Because that you're going to come out with something that you may not be able to actually work with as well if it's something that is important, but actually isn't a felt value. Ask the questions: what makes you lose track of time? Like everything. Everything. Everything makes me lose track of time. What would you do for free? Those sorts of things. Okay, it's like a dopamine map. The second thing is that the masking cost of misaligned value. So there is one thing that is really crucial, especially for women who've spent their whole lives trying to fit in, who have ADHD, and society has basically either told them that they're stupid or that they're too much or too sensitive or too disorganized or they're just not invited to the party. And you've watched how other people operate, and you've internalized a hierarchy of values that goes something like responsibility. The big one that if you have this as a value, chances are you don't have ADHD, delayed gratification. It's an actual value. I've worked with so many people and I've worked with values so long and I've been a coach for so long now that I clearly recognize that people have values that I couldn't in a million years. It's alien to me that somebody would have the value of worked with a girl who had a value of mathematics once. Super weird, super awesome. Can't even begin to imagine what it's like to be her, but God bless. It was a beautiful experience. But yes, I get these people who are delayed gratification. They love, love, love this experience of delayed gratification. What a thing. Financial security, discipline, long-term planning, achievement, that kind of stuff. What often happens is people with ADHD, and again, especially women or men who buy into a lot of stereotypical stuff, decide that those should be their values. And they will have been conditioned that those should be their values. They will have been taught how to make those their values. They will have read book after book about how to make those your values, hacks to value those things, like all of that kind of stuff. But here's what ends up happening, of course, is that your actual value hierarchy is different than that. And so you end up with a whole bunch of masking. And masking is exhausting. And we all know what masking is. It's exactly what it sounds like. And so this is where the exhaustion, of course, isn't laziness. It's not that you're broken. It's just that you're running your life on somebody else's operating system. It's like you're a Mac trying to run Windows. It just doesn't work that way. And so I feel like a lot of the work that it's so interesting to me thinking back to the clients that I've had where they've come in and said to me, Tara, I have to you guys, some of you have attended my values workshops, and I give myself a lot of compassion and a lot of grace because I always check with intention. I always did my best to make sure that values are aligned with all the things that you really want to be and all that kind of stuff. But I'm also very good at shifting values. One of the things that I got very good at as a coach is being able to work with somebody who says, currently my value is, I don't know, appreciation, being appreciated or something like that. And my life is just not conducive to that. Got 85 kids and I have a husband who travels all the time and all that kind of stuff. I need to stop searching for this value to be filled that is clearly not going to be filled right now. How do we shift that around so my value, my felt experience of feeling fulfilled and all that kind of stuff is actually what it would be something like planning the day and achieving the goals of my plan, like following through, that sort of stuff. And while it's still a little bit, I'm still moving the puzzle pieces around for how this plays out because that is a real situation for a lot of people where they don't have access currently to the things that they most value. And it is not useful to say, just carry on, just continue to be okay not having those things you value. And the fact that we can shift around values using NLP tools like internal representations and actually timeline therapy and that kind of stuff, you want to make sure that you're not interfering with long-standing masked values. So it would be useful for somebody who feels like they can't live their current value to make sure, like what I'll be doing going forward with all of this is figuring out whether or not I am dealing with somebody who's wired this way and wired a bit differently, and really brainstorming about how do we find a value that is adjacent to, right? That is not different from, that is not a polarity to, that is not something that you currently don't have, but is adjacent to a value that currently you may not be able to fulfill. So if you're not in a situation where you can feel deep appreciation and yet you know that's one of your biggest values, then I would look for something adjacent, making a difference. So making an impact, making a difference, I would have to work with the person to find what it feels like. So when they feel appreciation, maybe it makes them feel worthy. And I would find something else that makes them feel that same type of worthiness. And then see if we couldn't build that up as something they could make more room for in their life, that they could actually spend more time on, so that they still get the same feeling that the other value brings them, but they don't spend their lives chasing something that is unavailable to them. And that they don't replace it with a value that a neurotypical world tells them should be available to them, but actually isn't going to be available to them given their wiring. The next thing that is really important to think about is impulsivity as values guided and not as chaotic. So what's really cool is thinking about, like, there's such a bad rap to ADHD kind of impulsivity. A lot of it for good reason. Let's be real. It's like sometimes the kind of impulsivity that happens does lead to bad things. However, the narrative is that like impulsive people are thoughtless, irresponsible, making decisions without considering consequences, that sort of thing. But it's incomplete. Even if it's true, it's still incomplete, because I find that the way that I've been thinking about this now is that impulsivity is not random, right? I don't impulsively go gamble because I don't gamble. So even though I'm like pretty severe on the ADHD thing, if somebody comes up to me and is like, "Hey man, let's go down and spend some money at the track or where like the horses or what are they doing?" I'm not going to impulsively do that because that is not something that I do. If somebody was like, "Hey Tar, do you want to do some lines of cocaine?" I'd be like, "No, I actually I don't do those, thank you." And no amount of ADHD or impulsivity is going to make me be like, "Yeah, okay." So that sounds great. But my own things, if somebody's Tara, I know you said you were going to work this afternoon, but there's like a puppy parade going on downtown. Forget about it. My ability to be like, no, I really do have to get this work done. I'm just going to have to skip those 50 puppies walking down the, forget about it. I'm done. I'm done like dinner, right? Or if somebody says, do you want to go? There's a Thai food place. My impulsivity is going to be absolutely in line with who I am, right? It is not its own thing on its own. So the way that I've framed this a little bit is that like when an ADHD person says yes to somebody, or a neurotypical person, because there are probably very similar experiences for neurotypical people, but happens more to us. When they say yes to something spontaneously, it's not recklessness. It's like a lightning fast assessment of their values. Does this align with what I value right now? Going to see a bunch of dogs walking down a street, like all dressed up? Yeah. Does it feel alive? Absolutely. This is literally what I live for. Does it feel like me? Does this feel like truly me living my best moment, having my best experiences? Yes, sir, it does. When the answer to that is all yes, we move toward it faster. We have a tendency to want to move toward it immediately. And that's where this stuff good in the brain where that they can actually track, that is trackable. This is what we actually see happening is it really happens fast. So core values can be embedded as system one. Yes, yes, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's very commonly explained as a character flaw, and it's just not useful to do this. It's not useful to talk about somebody's impulsivity as a character flaw. Even those ones, I don't know about the cocaine, that's probably pretty troublesome. But somebody who likes to gamble, or somebody who likes to shop, or somebody who likes to overeat, or whatever the thing is that may actually have a negative consequence, it's still not a character flaw of that person to be impulsive about it. It may be a behavior that needs to be changed because it has such a bad consequence in their life, but that is completely different from it being a character flaw of impulsivity. Impulsivity on its own as a standalone, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just right? And we all know examples. I don't even have to say this to you, but somebody with ADHD gets a last minute call from a friend who says, "Hey man, we've got a seat in the car. We're going on a road trip for the weekend." Whatever it is, the ADHD person thinks, "Do I want to be with these people? Will this be an awesome adventure? Will I feel alive doing this? If yes, let's go." And a neurotypical person may have trouble doing that, right? They might need to think about it. They might need to figure out if they should really do it and if it makes sense and all this kind of stuff. And then they miss the opportunity. And I'm already down the highway, living my best life. And there are those things, of course, that are beautiful. And again, all of this is just for information and for different frames, especially as coaches, where you want to place it. I will never, ever again be helping somebody to become less impulsive. Absolutely not. That is my old thinking. Impulsivity is not a problem. What I would do with somebody who thinks or has been told by society or people that they have an impulse problem would be to actually get them really, really aligned with their values and help them to make sure that when they are being impulsive, it's in line with their values and that they understand the consequences of it. Not that they stop being impulsive. It's a very different way to look at it, right? So it is true that possibly there is a time when I should say no to the dog parade, but if I have an actual client one-on-one, but the truth is I wouldn't go. If I had a client that I had already said 3 o'clock, and I know this client is coming down to see me and whatever, I don't ever cancel appointments or not show up to an appointment because of something impulsive, right? So I already have a set of values that actually stops me from doing something detrimental because of my mad love of dogs. But I will for sure if I was going to sit down and review my SEO or something like that. Yeah, I'm going to go see the dogs. But you know what? I bet you on my deathbed, I will not regret that. If you ask me to align my values, I think probably the truth is that a lot of those decisions, that's what has made my life joyful. That's what has made my life. And I understand it's not in line with other people's values, but I don't know about you guys, but I think myself and a lot of the people I know with ADHD wiring are quite happy to deal with the consequences of their own decisions. There's a bunch that we regret and get a lot of frustration around, but there's a lot that we're able to say, no, I get it. I get it that I'm going to be up till 2 o'clock in the morning now doing this. And I'm willing to accept that. It was worth it. Wait, I can't see you. Yeah. See, that's a hard one. I don't know. Puppies while I reorganize my furniture? I think. Okay, so the coaching work for impulsivity is, I wrote down, it's to honor it as data and then build systems around it. Most of those systems really you would be so much better off in serving your clients so much better to look at their values and where their impulsivity shows up instead of trying to fix it. Okay, another is the future pacing. So I've talked a lot about this, but it's just like increasingly I'm noticing how important this future pacing stuff is. And because I'm an NLP person and because so much of our work is based on like really trying to imprint and install in the future the outcomes that we want, right? This is all you've heard me and Alan say a million times. Past is not where we're going to focus because the past is over. We're going to focus on where you are right now and where you want to be. And with a deeper understanding now of how different that is for people who are wired differently. What you don't want to do is imagine that you yourself or somebody you're working with is going to get away with saying, I'm present oriented, so I can't have future values. My only values can be puppies. That's not obviously going to be helpful. It's also not helpful to believe that you can't plan or that you can't build toward anything long term. Obviously, this isn't helpful or useful. The difference is that those values have to have present moment dopamine thread running through them, or you're not going to sustain them. You're not going to help your client sustain values that are future if you cannot run dopamine through them right now. So this is pretty like structural. You've got to be on it. You've got to understand what you're doing when you're trying to help somebody with ADHD get into the future. And I don't have this down yet. This is something I'm still working on. But if you think about the differences between the two framings, so someone says, I should save for retirement because that's what responsible people do, and therefore that is what I should do. It's very abstract, right? It's out in the future, it's very abstract, and it relies on importance being the driving force, which for neurotypical people opens up the cognitive whatever, and that causes them to make the call to the bank, set up the account, set up the withdrawal that comes out automatically toward the blah, blah, blah. For those of us that don't have importance as a gate opener to our executive functioning, we need something else. So we need something that is going to feel right now like we have to do it or like we want to do it. So what future self do I want to become that excites me right now? So what version of myself in 5 years would feel like I've succeeded? So suddenly you're anchoring the future in the present moment excitement. Sometimes, again, this is like I'm still working through my own shame of like, it feels like you have to treat me a little bit like I'm a child, my ADHD clients, because like, how do we make this exciting? But that is actually what has to happen. I have to make it exciting for myself to imagine it so that I can get enough dopamine so that I can actually put it into a present context that will allow me to my present self to set up my future self. So maybe the future version of me is someone who travels all the time. Maybe it's someone who doesn't have to answer to anybody else. Maybe it's me living alone in my cabin in the woods where I have nothing but all pigs and cows or something. But it has to be a vision. And this isn't just like boarding. So this is not the equivalent of deciding that you're going to put up a vision board and you're going to work toward that. This is something that you directly thread to something that you can activate right now to create that future to happen. So it wouldn't be useful to keep a vision board on my wall as if that's going to motivate me every day abstractly to sit down and do my work. It's not going to do it. If I look at my vision board of whatever it is, I'm still going to move my furniture around instead of doing my budget because it's not directly tied in. You know what I mean? I've just taken sort of two. So what it has to be is like when I do decide that I'm going to whatever, do my banking or do my something that I'm not normally able to really focus on well, I have to have a direct experience of if I do this every Friday afternoon and I actually get this done or I do this particular task right now, what I'm literally doing is I'm reverse engineering that future vision of myself who's going to be so excited when I have $20,000 in a savings account that is going to allow me to whatever it is and trace that all the way back to this particular action right now. And that lift, and I've been trying it recently, and it does really work. It's taking the abstract out of it. It's taking this generalized, and it brings me back autonomy. I don't feel anymore like I have to do this because responsible people do this, and I'm the jackass child that can't figure out how to do it. Like all of that stuff that has been happening. I'm sitting here now actually associating, I really do want that $20,000 on my 65th birthday that I am going to take a year off and travel around the world. This is what I want. 20,000 wouldn't get me very far, but I can attach it to that idea and it does actually do the job of, okay, this is worth it. I want to do this. I don't have to do this. I'm not doing this because it's responsible. I want to do this. And again, I could not use that to get me through the whole day. That would not work to get me through 8 hours of doing something. It does get me on task for one necessary task. Again, just using this kind of wiring in a way where it's really tactical for you. So things like if you're going to run a marathon, the usefulness, and again, this is one of these beautiful, I did it without knowing I was doing it, but I actually found that I wasn't, for years I wanted to, and I couldn't do it because I just couldn't get myself to run consistently enough to do it. But I found a program that was actually went week by week instead of in an understandable way, where I basically understood that if I meet my goal this week, it reevaluates itself and then creates my next week goal, and then reevaluates itself and creates the next week goal. So I was literally working in 1 week increments, and I knew what I had to hit for my targets in 1 week increments, knowing at the back of my head that if I do this for 3 months, I'm going to be able to run 21 kilometers at the end of this. And I couldn't barely get through 5 when I started. But it didn't work for me to go all the way there. It did work beautifully for me to know that I've got to run 4 times this week, this pace, this whatever, and try and do that. And so this breaking down of things so that you can actually have that immediate feedback of what you're trying to achieve. And I was trying to beat the Friday goal every week, not the 3-month out goal. This is stuff that I would really highly suggest when you're working with somebody. You've got to know where they're going to be activated and you've got to actually see it. You can't rely on them telling you that they're good at like that too often coaches will get tricked by somebody getting really excited about a future state. But if you don't have it structured well enough, it's going to pass overnight. You know what I mean? They're going to get really excited and you feel as a coach like you've done a really good job because they're like so excited now about all the weight they're going to lose. and you feel like they left feeling so motivated and so confident and so much better about it because you set this goal and all this kind of stuff, but it's probably not going to work. It's probably going to blow out the next morning unless what you've done is actually created a task specific. Tomorrow morning, when you make your toast and you put your running shoes on, you've attached that to something that can actually be a dopamine drive for them right there in that moment, because they're not going to come back to this session and remember what they were excited about way down the road. It has to be this really tightly knit experience. James Clear is onto this. There's a whole bunch of stuff in his Atomic Habits that is really useful for the ADHD brain. I'm guessing that probably I don't know, I haven't actually looked into it, but probably why it's so successful is that it actually speaks to people who aren't normally successful because they're wired differently, and that becomes successful. Okay, last one. No, okay, I'm going to skip this because this is the exercise and I don't want to have to rush through the other one. So, through my own experience, through my clients' experience, with some amount of research, and of course with AI working all together, I came up with a list of 15 values that I think are worth keeping as a list of values. I will send them out to you. I didn't get it done on time to actually have a slide for you here, but I will send this out to you just after we're done. These are values that I would make sure, if you are working with somebody who is ADHD or if you yourself, check these values. Because again, you guys know this, I could go on for days and days about values, and I'd love to. But so often we don't know our values. Every single client, bar none, that I have ever worked with ends up discovering values through their work with me that they didn't know they valued, just because they had never thought about it as a value. So here they are. Autonomy. Autonomy is almost for sure going to be, because people with ADHD have this sort of energy that always trying to come out, making their own choices without external control, probably conditioned. Probably something that they're conditioned because they feel like their whole life people have been trying to constrain them, direct them and constrain them, and that has been uncomfortable. It's not like a lot of neurotypical people who the direction has been like helpful, and really people who say, I love when people just give me rules and order and structure, and then I know what to do and I can follow it. I have my best friend is here, and it's so funny. She just talks about, I just really like it when people give me rules because then I can just follow the rules and it makes me feel really good about it. It's so funny. And I'm laughing. It was just the most hilarious conversation between the two of us where I was like, as soon as somebody gives me a rule, every fiber of my being just feels like now I need to break it. I'm not an asshole. It just immediately must trigger that sense of a lifetime full of, the rules never quite fit me well, serve me well. Anyway, okay, so making your own choices tends to be a value. Autonomy. Novelty, for sure. For sure. Craving new experiences, fresh stimulation, because we're always after stimulation and dopamine. It's going to be one of your values. Spontaneity, same sort of thing, but acting in the moment without rigid planning is going to likely be something. Not always. None of these are across the board, guys. There's going to be exceptions, of course. But spontaneity is probably one you want to explore. Freedom, not being constrained by rules that don't make sense. Every one of you who is here knows this one. Authenticity, being yourself without masking. So this is so worthwhile. It's so important to talk to your clients about this because some people don't feel this way. They haven't been masking their whole life. They feel like they've done a really good job about being who they are. And then there's the people who, because they have had to mask to get through so much, authenticity has become it has emerged, right? These 40-year-old women who get to realize they have an ADHD diagnosis. This is the driving force. Connection, deep, real relationships where you're truly seen. I would argue probably a lot of this is maybe not exclusive to ADHD. Probably isn't. I'm going to blame that one on AI. Intensity, definitely. Check this value out. Intensity is one that doesn't usually come to mind when people think about aliveness and what they really value. But intensity it's passion, right? It's that feeling that you get. And essentially what's happening is it's when you're feeding your nervous system all the stuff that actually allows you to flow. It allows your brain to flow. It allows everything to be working the way that it wants to work when you're wired this way. Intensity allows you to go all in. Mastery. So getting really good at things you care about. This is across the board, right? We know that pretty much any of the geniuses. Paul, what did you just say? I'm curious what you just said. Oh, it wasn't anything. Okay. Are you able to come off mute? Oh, there.
I was gonna type because I think it's easier than my voice
Oh,
right now. I'm seeing autonomy, mastery, and I'll bet purpose is on their list too. Because those are the three that I've been coaching for 10, 15 years as
yeah.
being fundamental drivers to people in organizations who are demotivated. They don't have autonomy, the ability to make their own choices, mastery, the ability to just learn without boundaries or pressure or
Mm,
constraints, right?
mm,
When I know I am getting better at something, it's so much better. And purpose, that connection to meaning, right? It's just
yeah.
when I saw autonomy and mastery, I'm like, oh, wait, I
Yeah.
started to see
Yeah.
some of the core values. When you
Yeah.
mentioned authenticity and connection, that's
Right.
almost everyone that who I work with,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
powerful. It's a great list so far. I didn't want to interrupt. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. No, it's
Keep
fine. It's
going, keep
great. Thank
going.
you. Thank you. So yeah, mastery, getting really good at things you care about. Creativity is just so often, right? With ADHD wired brains, just probably proportionately, probably a little bit more than the rest of the population, making and expressing things. Impact. Again, I would argue impact, I don't know, across the board. I don't like that one specifically as ADHD. It might be a much more felt value, though. That's all. Presence, being fully engaged right now, not thinking about later. Discovering that as one of my values, personally realizing that anything that allows me to be completely present, I was getting confused with the thing that allowed me to be present. Right. So I was getting my values mixed up with thinking that being alone reading a book was actually a value of mine, where it was like, nope, it's just it's that sort of presence, right? When I'm not being distracted by anything and my attention goes into this really narrow field, I actually feel myself. I feel like I am fully in me. That's the thing I value. The book is really neither here nor there, right? Whether I'm doing it with a book or something else. So it's really helpful to understand that is the thing that I should be seeking, as opposed to thinking that what I want to do is go read a book. That's not really what I want to do. I actually want the experience of feeling presence in this way. Justice, calling out what's unfair. I would say this is ADHD people because any body of people, any group of people who have basically not been catered to by society tend to have a pretty high value on justice, fairness, right? They're just more sensitive to it because often it has felt like they're particularly aware of injustice. Flexibility, changing course when something isn't working. This is one of those values that is so much fun to recognize in yourself and be able to actually identify it as a value, to realize that genuinely sometimes it's really nice to know that it's something you value so that you can put yourself in situations where flexibility is going to be a featured skill that is embraced. Right? You don't want to, so many people love it, but they only get to experience it when there's trouble, like when they're problem solving. So being able to recognize that this is something that you really value, what a cool thing to try and figure out in your life. How can you have more of this, do more of this? And certainly career wise, this would be such a good one to know about. Competence, just knowing that you are competent, because again, so often people with ADHD and other neurodiversities have been made to feel incompetent. It's going to be a sensitive one that you highly value. And then adventure, which is just sort of goes along with it. Now, here's the list. I'll go through it quickly here. These are some of the values that society will have taught everyone that are good values to have. The church applauds you, school applauds you, corporate jobs applaud you. All of those of you that know values levels, Grace. So values level 4 things, right? So any sort of big body of authority is going to say these are good things that you're taught to have discipline as a value, following through on things through willpower alone, specifically through willpower alone. delayed gratification, waiting for rewards in the distant future. We are taught from day one. That is something that we should learn to have in ourselves. And of course, there is some value in that, but I wish that we could live in a world where it didn't have to be so revered as a value. Consistency, doing the same thing the same way repeatedly. We spend our whole school lives being told that we should like the fact that the bell rings and you do this and you do that and whatever. Financial security, building wealth through careful long-term planning. I don't know, discuss amongst yourselves. A responsibility, meeting obligation above all else. This one is, I would love to have a whole conversation, just discussion about, are we supposed to value responsibility so much? We're all certainly taught that we should. And it's a hard one to argue that maybe we don't need to all value responsibility so much. I don't know. Predictability, knowing what's coming, sticking to the plan, and obedience, following rules and authority. Those are all ones that, if you are someone with ADHD, are going to be just probably tougher for you to feel good valuing than other people, just because they're harder. They're harder ones to pull off. And like I say, I know that there are people who do really, my mother is an example of, she loves responsibility. And maybe conditioned, right? Maybe 70 years of conditioning, I don't know. But it genuinely, I can see her light up when there's rules and she's responsible and like all that kind of stuff. It just really does fill her. And I believe that is really true for a lot of people. There's also perfection. Getting everything right the first time doesn't tend to be something that goes along with ADHD. Productivity, so optimizing output and efficiency, not normally something that we really prize. And stability, keeping everything the same and safe. Not normally something we value. So not to say that we don't value it, but it's just not when we ask the question, what makes you feel most alive? I do have clients who would say stability, who would actually say, I get so lit up when I just look at the stability of my life. And that is something that for a lot of people is a real value. But these are some values that you would want to work with and make sure that it isn't something that is creating more suffering and shame and all of the other things associated to it. Okay, it's 9:02, so I'll stop. I will tell you that the last thing that I had down here that I wanted to share with you very quickly is just the nature nurture, because I think when it comes to values, it is really important to have an opinion anyway, or have your perspective really open, or keep your mind really curious about. There's a big load of people who believe that ADHD is all nurture, all conditioning, it's all learned. Nobody comes out of the womb with an ADHD wired brain. It has everything to do with how life treats you from the moment you come out of the womb. There's Gabor Mate, who basically blames it all on the mother and trauma. There's a whole world of people. And then there's the other side that there are people saying this is purely genetics. This is just genetically. Nothing you can do about it. It's genetics. They can see it. And those people are all just, most of them are you take the medication, puts your brain to where it should be, problem solved. And most of the study there's a guy named Stephen Hinshaw, and he is the voice that I like the most right now, who acknowledges, as it's gotta be, that both are massively influential when it comes to ADHD. There probably is a lot of nature. There probably is a lot of nurture, but I probably need to do a whole, I don't know, article, blog, talk, something on that, because when you're in the business of fixing the brain or adjusting the brain or rewiring the brain or influencing the brain, any of those things, you just want to make sure that you know where your opinion is coming from and continue to ask really good questions about that, and just believe your clients. Right? The bottom line always is believe their experience. So if somebody is saying to you, I think I got this because, then that is their experience of it. And if somebody says, I think this is, and then you, with your own approach to it, can suggest that they may be able to shift and change this, and they may want to leave this one alone and learn how to accept and embrace it. So I'll leave it there. Values. I really highly suggest anyone coaching anyone, just always pay attention to these values. Make sure that you understand your client's values and that you're braiding them into the work that you're doing around all of this.